Good morning. And welcome to chapel on this rather frigid Martin Luther King Day. We will begin this morning by hearing from the Gustavus Choir, who is preparing for their Midwest tour, and they will be singing a prayer by Ken Burton. Thank you to the G Choir for that beautiful music to begin our morning. And now please join me in a word of prayer. Gracious God, you teach us that all people are beloved, all skin colors are beautiful, and all identities are worthy of respect. Let us see how it is that we are bound together in an inescapable network of mutuality and tied to a single garment of destiny. Call us into your ongoing movement of justice, peace, and love in our communities and in the world. Help us delight in our diversities and transform any despair into hope-filled action. United in this time of learning and reflecting, may we find rest and strength, renewal and inspiration. We ask this today as we remember the prophets, activists, visionaries, and all reformers of the civil rights era. Amen.
Good morning, Gustavus. And thank you, G Choir. That was lovely. Welcome, everyone, online and here with us in person today for this annual Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Lecture. As we begin today, we acknowledge that Gustavus Adolphus College is located on the homelands of the Dakota people, whose spiritual traditions include the belief that this land, along with the creatures and people living on it, are relatives. We recognize that acknowledging the land is an important but limited gesture, and our work continues beyond statements into real change, from the classroom to the community, through difficult conversations and ongoing research into the origins of our presence on this site. The MLK lecture at Gustavus was first held in 1986 as an event created by the Peace, Justice, and Conflict Studies program. Since 2010, we have aligned our lecture with the national holiday. Something important that we have done over the past year is to create a statement of belonging for Gustavus. I want to remind you of that today. It reads, "We believe in a culture of belonging and acceptance. We respect and affirm the dignity of all people. We know diversity is a strength. We embrace the complexities and challenges of equity and inclusion. And we invite you to discover your best self." It's inviting you to discover your best self that I want you to think about as we listen today to this lecture. It means we need to lean into doing the difficult work to examine and challenge our biases, practices, and institutional structures to advance our core values of excellence, community, justice, service, and faith. I am grateful to so many people here who share in that commitment as we collectively do the important work of pushing for change. Today, I am very pleased to welcome Karith Foster to Gustavus. For over a decade, Karith has given presentations and training at top companies and universities, including Gustavus. She's the best-selling author of You Can Be Perfect or You Can Be Happy. She's also the founder of Inversity, which many of us here on campus have used to further our learning on issues of diversity and belonging. Before founding Inversity, Karith worked in human resources at Estee Lauder's corporate headquarters, was a broadcast journalist, including at ABC's The View, and co-hosted MSNBC's Imus in the Morning, a nationally syndicated show. Her 25-year passion for stand-up comedy led to TV and radio appearances on Oprah, The Today Show, and Comedy Central. Karith is an alumna of Stevens College and Oxford University. On this national holiday honoring Dr. King, we are so pleased that you are here. We're reminded that the work of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging needs to happen every day by each of us. I'm so pleased that all of you are here today to learn, to reflect, and to leave ready to act. Now please join me in welcoming Karith Foster to the podium.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Bergman. Thank you all for that wonderful, warm reception. G Choir, that was awesome. Y'all took me back. Being in a space like this takes me back. I went to a Lutheran preschool, so it's just all flooding back. I teared up a little bit. Today is, yes, in celebration of Dr. King, but this is also in celebration of you and of me, of all of us. And I want to make sure that while we call this a lecture, we understand that this is also a conversation. And a conversation means dialogue. And it means interaction. And it means you hear what I'm saying, and I hear what you're saying. And that's what we're going to do in the next hour. And I'm so excited to be able to come and share, enlighten, hopefully give you some takeaways, a couple laughs. And we leave this space in this place just reinvigorated in living out Dr. King's dream. So without further ado, you heard a lot about me. I just wanted to reiterate that while I have done many, many things, I still have a lot of things on my list. And all of those things have culminated into who I am today and what I like to think I can bring to the world. And of course, the impact that I like to make. And I want to reiterate that every single one of us, even if you've got, nothing on that list or a couple of those things on that list, who you are and what you're doing is really important because it's who you are, it's your identity. And that should always be honored. Dr. King has been one of those role models, figures that while we have never interacted personally, right? We've seen videos, we've read his speeches, we know of his legacy. And hopefully it's not just an idea for a holiday, a day off, a sale, like a lot of things have become with certain holidays and certain people that we admire. Hopefully we really take the time to think about how much he actually did in his short time on this earth. And, one of the things I'd like is to ask you, what words come to mind when you hear of Dr. King or think about his legacy? I want you to just shout it out. It's like a game show. Shout it out. Justice. What'd you say over here? Free? Dream, yes. Don't make me call on you. Peace. Keep going. Persistence. Did you say freedom? Yes. Persistence, freedom. What else? Civil rights. Dream again. What else? Give me 3 more. Come on. Say that again. I couldn't hear that. Happiness. Inspiring. One more. Come on. Don't be shy. You guys know, first of all, if this was a Taylor Swift concert, all the front rows would be filled up. You'd be fighting to get up here. Don't be shy. Give me one more word. Equality. Okay, I had a bunch of people say stuff at once. Inclusion. Awesome. So, I put together this little mosaic, right? Brave, stoic, young. Y'all, he wasn't even 40 years old when he was out there doing this work. right? I also think of funny, humorous. He had a good sense of humor. You kind of have to have a good sense of humor, right? If you're going to be putting yourself out there to be so vulnerable and to be such a beacon of light. Some of the other words I have up there are fearless, right? Tactical. He had to be smart. He had to be brave. He had to think a couple steps ahead because he knew he was engaged with people who weren't going to see things the same way or may not have wanted to hear what he had to say, may not have agreed with his methodology, which was peace, right? Because here he was trying to tackle something that was harmful, that was hurtful, that causes vitriol, that causes people to be angry and mad and resentful, even vengeful sometimes. But he had to say, no, I'm going to be the bigger person, and I want to show everybody else how to do that too. That took bravery. That took fearlessness. So he was also an incredible orator and a wordsmith. And I like to think that that's one of my gifts, to be able to speak to people, to be able to play with words. I know as a speaker, as an author, as a comedian, I love words. I love words. And actually, it's how I started my life. I was not planning to do this, by the way, just FYI. I was going to be a pediatrician. I took Latin in high school. I didn't just take Latin. I was vice president of the Latin club. That's how nerded out I was. I am a dork in cool kids' clothing, all right? I will live it all the way to the end of my life. And I like to look at words, and I think about words, right? Like the roots of words, the prefixes, anything that's progress, right? Program, pro this or other, that's for something, right? Anything that's anti-pasta, anti-establishment, anti-government, anti-whatever, that's against something. And I looked at the word diversity. Because in my mind, I always was like, how is it that for decades now we've been spending all this money on diversity efforts, and it feels like 2 steps forward, 10 steps back? And the more I looked at the word, the more I'm like, what makes up this word? And I looked at it, and the first 3 letters were DIV. I thought about all the words that start with that. Divide, division, divorce. And yet diversity is supposed to be bringing all of us together. Maybe there's something there. Now, we know diversity is a good thing, right? Because we know the idea of having different people from different backgrounds and different experiences all coming together is supposed to make something better, and it is, if we can value it as that and make it a truly inclusive experience and conversation where everybody is part of the conversation, like Dr. King really set out for us to follow and do. But sometimes I think it's been hijacked, the word diversity. And I think it's caused more division and more polarization. And oftentimes we'll find ourselves saying, well, you're only diverse if you meet these qualifications. You're only diverse if you fall into these categories. And I personally think Dr. King would be very disappointed that that's the direction things have gone, because that was not the messaging that he came here to deliver. So with that in mind, I created the word Inversity. And I wanted to kind of pick up the torch, if you will, where Dr. King was cut off. And that torch is to say, look, let's stop focusing on what separates and divides us. We can acknowledge all the things that make us us and celebrate them, of course. It's not a matter of sweeping it under the rug. It's a matter of saying, yes, things exist that aren't nice. But what if we took the onus to make the sincere effort to stop focusing on what separates and divides us, and instead look at what it is we have in common, how we can be truly inclusive of one another, but most importantly and powerfully, how can we be introspective, right? And I think that's the part of all the DEI work that hasn't really been a part of the conversation. It's a bit about how we see other people, how we're supposed to treat other people. Well, what about looking inside? Because real change, whether we want to admit it or not, because it's hard sometimes, real change has to start with you. It has to. Nobody else can make you think a certain way. They can influence you, sure, but you're always going to have your own mind. Nobody else can change your heart. You have to be willing to be open enough to hearing certain things and certain messages and making changes. And that's what Inversity is. Looking at your value and understanding your worth as human beings who were divinely put here on this planet. And knowing that if you are here, you have a purpose, then that means everybody else around you here has value and worth and a purpose. But if you can't see it in yourself, there's no way you can see it in somebody else. So we have to have a reframing of how we have these conversations, and we have to have a reframing of our own mindset of how we see ourselves. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So one of the things that Dr. King really was brilliant at was understanding the law of attraction, right? And I know a lot of people think, oh, that's woo-woo stuff. Maybe a little bit. But I also think it's something that we witness every day. I mean, have you ever been in a room and everything's fine and somebody just comes in boiling mad, angry, and it just shifts everything? And then you end up getting mad and angry, you don't even know why? Or you're in a room, maybe you're not having a good day, and somebody just walks in with the most amazing smile. Or they start laughing, and you start laughing. Like energy attracts like energy. That's why it's so important that how we go into any situation, any conversation, especially ones about being inclusive of one another, that we do so with warmth and with kindness as much as we can help it. And that's not to say there aren't things to get upset about, there aren't things to be angry about, there aren't things to be disappointed about. But if we're really sincere in making an effort to shift things to the positive, you have to bring the positive. Where your energy goes, the energy flows. Messaging. This is also a key component of what Dr. King did. He knew how to talk to people. He knew how to reach people. He knew how to get their attention. Now, not everybody is totally gifted in that. I've been doing this for 20 plus years, okay? Even longer, because I started doing debate and speech in high school. But we still have to understand that, you know, everybody who's married knows this. It's not what you say, it's how you say it, right? Because things can be misinterpreted sometimes. Even in your head, you have the best intentions, but sometimes something you can say, somebody can hear it through their own ears. They hear it through their own filter. And let's be very honest. Every single one of us, as my theater professor in college would say, we are the stars of our own one-person play, right? And we forget sometimes that, oh yeah, the spotlight's not just on me, there's multiple spotlights because there's other people on the stage. And so we have to think about that when we talk to people, when we share, when we're delivering a message. You know, I know how I feel about this, but how might somebody else receive this? And it's just about awareness. It's just about consideration. And we have to stop being fearful. If Dr. King taught us nothing else, it was that we cannot live in a space of fear. And fear shows up in different ways, right? Fear isn't just being afraid of someone else or an idea. Fear shows up sometimes in being afraid of how we might look, being afraid of saying the wrong thing, being afraid of taking a stand when we know that something isn't right. But the majority of people may not see it that way yet. And so we may be looked at as a pariah or as, you know, someone who's going against the grain. We have to remove fear from our everyday interactions. And that's not going to be an overnight easy thing. It's practice, right? But the more you step out of your fear, the more confidence you get. the more you're able to be your true, authentic self. And I think, we are in the day and age of people really encouraging that, being your true, authentic self. Not just, bowing to what society says you should do or be or look like or study or think like. We need to take that also into this conversation. So much of what I do and what Dr. King did was about setting the intention. And every year, 2024, now we're in, which is wild, I can't believe we're here already, I have word of the year. And my word this year, my intention for this year is to be brave. I posted that on my LinkedIn account, and I'm sticking to it. To be brave. Because even I, who get up in front of hundreds, sometimes thousands of people, I get a little intimidated sometimes. I get a little worried. I do have concerns that sometimes maybe what I'm saying may not hit the way I necessarily want it to, or it might be misinterpreted. But I'm going to stand in my bravery, and I'm going to stand in my truth. And that is what Dr. King wanted for all of us, and that's certainly what he did. So how do we get beyond the stereotypes? Because quite honestly, isn't that really what's holding a lot of us back? The fact that we do stereotype. And I'm not here to make this a wagging my finger in your face. Oh, shame on you, go sit in the corner, go home and be guilty, feel bad for stereotyping. Guess what? We all do it, myself included. I've had the opportunity, now I can cross Gustavus off my list of being at some incredible institutions. In 2020, I was invited to Stanford University Graduate School of Business, and I was invited to be a luminary for their Knight Hennessy Scholars Program, which is like their equivalent of like Oxford Rhodes Scholars. So it's a pretty big deal. And I got to bring the concept of Inversity. And it wasn't just me that was there. There were other people who spoke. There's in fact a gentleman who was an adjunct biology professor. He's also a writer. He does a lot of work for Newsweek, he writes. But he was there talking about gene editing, like DNA, CRISPR stuff, which I don't know how scientific you all are here, but that's some pretty advanced technology. I mean, we're talking about gene editing, mRNA stuff. We're talking about, changing people's biology, which is kind of cool and kind of scary because you're talking about either, curing horrific diseases like sickle cell anemia or, creating designer babies. Like, it's kind of this wild scale. And I remember thinking, I got to talk to this guy because of this work that I do. I want to be able to take to my audiences an exact percentage of how close we are genetically. Like, if we're really going to tackle this stereotyping thing, I want people to know how much we have in common, like how close we really are. So after he spoke, I got to, I'm sorry, my hair's caught in the mic. After he spoke, I went and sat down with him, and I said, look, this is what I do. I'm so not even in your world of science and biology, but I'm really curious. Can you help me out? Can you give me a number? How close are we genetically to one another? And he goes, oh, Karith, we are 99.99986% the same. I said, I'm sorry, what? I go, so wait a second. I go, so we've been fighting over 4/10,000ths of a percentage point? He goes, because in my mind, that's skin color, hair texture, eye color, feature. He goes, no, that's not even that. He goes, that 4/10,000ths of a percentage point, that's chromosomal. An example he shared with me was it's like if someone has Down syndrome versus someone who doesn't. And we know even if someone has Down syndrome, they're not a different person than us. But isn't that phenomenal? That's how close we are. And yet sometimes we use, even a fraction of a percentage point to differentiate ourselves from one another. If we all knew that, if we all had awareness that that's how close we were, do you think we'd really treat each other the same way? We'd probably really rethink things before we went on, making a major judgment about a certain group of people, or a certain ethnicity, or a certain religion, or certain... Isn't that fascinating? That changed my outlook on so many things. So, have you ever been biased in your whole life? Raise your hand. Okay. I love that you understand that. There's no way that your hand couldn't go up. You know why? Because there's over 150 different biases that have been detected. And the fact that you raised your hand, first of all, I want to say, thank you very much. And I want to acknowledge that, the reality is it's called unconscious bias because we don't even realize we're doing it. It comes so natural. So natural. Have you ever been in your car and been driving and somebody cuts you off and you just you get so mad, but you've already made a decision who it is? Whether it's a mom in a minivan, whether it's somebody of another ethnicity, whether it's somebody who's older or younger. And you just drive by just waiting to get confirmation on who it was that did that. Right? We all do it. We've all done it. And it's not a crime. But the idea is to understand that we can't always let those emotions and those reactions dictate how we interact with one another. We have to have a cognizance of that. We have to have an awareness of it. And when it does creep up, we have to say, okay, what did Karith say on Martin Luther King Day? What did she say on Martin Luther King Jr. Day? Okay, yeah, I'm gonna put that bias. I'm gonna tell it to have a back seat, and I'm gonna be, I'm gonna be chill. And it's practice. It's practice. So much of this work, like I said, is changing our behavior from the inside out. And it's not being forceful. It's not saying you have to do this. You don't have to do anything. When I was growing up, we were told you don't have to do anything but pay your taxes and die. And actually, the old school folks in my family would be like, stay black, pay your taxes and die. That's all you have to do. But if you want to change because you want to attract that better energy and those better relationships, you have the power to do that. You are so powerful. You are so powerful. And that's what Dr. King wanted everybody to know as well. We are so powerful, more than we could even imagine. And it's unfortunate we don't get told that enough. And it's unfortunate that we are sometimes, involved in things like social media or TV shows or certain movies or video games that usurp our energy, that take not just our power, but our awareness of how great we are away from us. And so that's something we really do need to be conscious of. So this is about learning, y'all, right? Learning what? Well, learning new aspects of ourselves. Like I said, there's always something to learn. Hopefully, when I work with these CEOs of these major companies, you know what I notice about all of them? They're always reading books or listening to audiobooks. They're always doing some kind of development program, right? Retreats. They're literally always looking to improve themselves, not because they are think they're not enough, but because they know that there's a lot they don't know. And they do want to be up on their game, and they do want to know more because they know that there's always more to learn. And there's more to learn about themselves. I was talking with Doug when he came and picked me up yesterday, and we were talking about, why is it so hard sometimes to have conversations around diversity? Especially because it's such an emotional thing, right? Because it's so personal. Right? It's so personal. And one of the examples I gave was, it's really easy for a lot of people to want to see people punished for not doing the right thing, right? And the example I gave, I have small kids, And when I drive them to school, I know my route, I know my path, and we go through a couple school zones. And every now and then, somebody just blazes through the school zone. Now, as a mom, I have a totally different feeling about it, because I'm like, oh, my babies, right? When I was younger in college, I was like, oh, school zone, they can look both ways. But now, I have a different perspective, right? And I'll be doing my 20, and somebody blazes past me. And I cannot tell you how good it feels when I see those blue and red lights from the police officer. I'm like, they got him. Now, there are times when I have dropped my children off, I got to get home to a meeting, I'm listening to the radio, I'm thinking about other stuff, I'm at a stoplight, but still in the school zone, and I forget. I'm still in that school zone, and I take off. And fortunately, there are other people around me, and I'm like, oh my goodness. And so I realize, and I step on the brakes, but I could have been that same person getting the ticket. You know, he who is without sin, right? And we all have to, again, this is awareness, right? But I learned that about myself. I learned that I am in no way, shape, or form holier than thou or perfect. And there is a part of me that has a I always say that wrong, Schadenfreude aspect. I think a lot of us do. And I think this comes up a lot in conversations around diversity, right? Somebody says the wrong thing or doesn't use a pronoun or makes a comment about someone that is an archaic, part of colloquialism. Like, we want everybody to be up to speed and up to date, and not everybody's there necessarily at the same time, because they may be from a different generation, they may be from a different part of the world, they may be different from a different part of the country. But we're so quick to jump on people for being wrong, right? To pull out those flashing blue and red lights. When what we really should be having is some grace and taking these opportunities to educate and enlighten versus attack someone. And honest to goodness, I believe that in my heart of hearts, that's what Dr. King wanted to continue. That's why he was about peace. That's why he was about having conversations and civil discourse and dialogue. And we can learn to do that. Now, it's challenging to learn new ways to communicate and to interpret things, because like I said, we're all the stars of our one-person play. And some of the best and worst people at communicating are children. These are my girls, by the way. They are the best and worst communicators. They're the best because, you know what? No filter. They're the worst because, you know what? No filter. We're in the car not long ago, and I'm jamming out. I'm listening to my Sirius XM. I've got my 80s on 8 going. That's my jam. And I'm singing along. I am happy. And the older one goes, ugh, Mom, is this another one of your songs from the 1900s? Excuse me? The 1900s? As accurate as that was, all I could think was, like, when I think 1900s, I think Little House on the Prairie, right? Wagon wheels, and oh my goodness, like, she threw me. Then we homeschool one of them. The other one goes to a private Montessori school. And so they don't get a lot of tech. They don't get a lot of TV time. But I was making dinner the other night, and the big one says to the little one, hey, you want to watch TV? She goes, yeah. She goes, let's watch something with famous people. And the little one goes, yeah, rich and famous people. And I'm listening, and I go, hey, guys, you know, Mommy's on TV pretty regularly. Am I rich and famous? The little one goes, are you on Muppets now? Because apparently that was the bar. I said, no, I'm not. I'll have to talk to my agent about that one. Thanks for putting me in my place. But you know what? I could have interpreted all of those things as slaps in the face, right? I could have interpreted those cute little stories as an insult. And think about how often that we would do that sometimes when someone really is innocently saying something, or someone doesn't know the context necessarily because it's not part of their experience or purview yet. This is stuff that we have to think about when we are communicating with others, when we are learning to interpret things. And it just takes some energy and effort and awareness. And of course, we have to think about new ways to engage, right? We are in the world of technology, and it is a lot of communication that we have over text, right? And how often can that get misinterpreted? Oh my goodness, someone does something in caps, and you're like, why are you yelling at me? You cannot, I can't hardly go online anymore because it seems like everything turns into a fight. The simplest things. I saw one of those BuzzFeed videos, it was a fast-forwarded video of someone making mac and cheese. Skillet mac and cheese. What is more beautiful than skillet mac and cheese? Unless you're gluten intolerant, I can understand, okay? But skillet mac and cheese. And then at the very end of the video, somebody put breadcrumbs on it and put it back. The fights that ensued. Y'all, people started talking about Trump, each other's mamas. I'm like, how did that even get into, what are we doing? Stop. Stop. It's not necessary. So we have to be very cognizant, right, of how we communicate and how we engage and what effort and energy we put into engaging with others, especially if it's going to be fruitless, especially if it's just something that gets us worked up and there's no real payoff in the end, right? Because again, we have to remember how worthy we are, and it's letting someone else rob us of that energy, of our positivity, of our light. Is that really what we're supposed to be doing? The answer is no. This is about thinking, y'all. It's about thinking of how can we have the most positive outcome possible when we have events, when we have parties, when we have plays, when we have anything that involves other people, but especially conversations around diversity and inclusion, or Inversity now. How can we make sure that everyone feels like they're part of it, that no one feels like an outlier? How can we set things up so that we know that the intention is to make a culture of true belonging happen? We got to think about that. It takes a little brain power, but it's not impossible. Got to think about, how do we challenge the stereotypes that we have, the outdated narratives and the labels? And of course, lastly, how do we invite critical thinking back into the conversation and the great minds of Dr. King, of Mother Teresa, of Mahatma Gandhi, all the people that were out there to make peace in the world? How do we do that? Yes, they were special, but they were no more special than anybody in this room. They were human beings as well. They just set their mind on a target of how they wanted to be and how they wanted to show up. We can do the same thing. So, this is also about feeling. Again, I think I said this earlier. There is no way that you cannot have any conversation around this and it not be personal. Because it is. It's about us. It's about who we are, how we look, how we show up, how we identify. And I think that's where a little bit sometimes corporate America gets jumbled, because they want to make it this straight, okay, we're going to have this program and we're going to have these lessons and you're going to listen to this lecture and you're going to check these boxes and then we're going to go on and do work. Okay, that's fine. All the data, all the metrics you can want in the world, is it going to erase how someone feels personally about something? Now, the idea isn't to overcorrect and make it in a completely emotional situation that becomes an irrational one. We have to also remember that while our feelings are very real and should be honored, no one has the right to make us feel a certain way about ourselves. That is all in here. We get to decide how we feel. No one else gets to dictate how you feel about yourself. No one. I wish I'd learned that when I was most of y'all's age. That took me a long time. It took me decades to understand that, yes, people could share their thoughts, they could have their opinions, which they were entitled to, but they were not allowed to tell me how I feel about me. That's where your power comes from. And lastly, this is so awesome because this is the blank slate we have. This is the palette, the clear palette. We get to create, y'all. We get to create from nothing something incredible. We get to create stronger connections with one another. We get to create new opportunities, next level awareness, right? We get to create what I call brave spaces. Now, psychologically, safe spaces, those are things that I think have been misinterpreted. Like a lot of things get misinterpreted sometimes. They say it so much, safe space, safe space, safe space. A psychological safe space, a true psychological safe space, means that you can say things, you can ask questions without fear of being rebuked, without fear of being canceled, without fear of being isolated from someone else. But I think we need to have brave spaces where you can show up and be who you are, but you're also brave enough to hear someone else's thoughts and ideas, even if they conflict with yours. That doesn't mean you have to agree. It doesn't mean you have to leave holding hands singing Kumbaya. But it does mean that you're brave enough to hear what somebody else's thoughts are, and you're brave enough to share your own and not hide. That's what we get to create. All of those things, think, feel, learn, create. If we can bring that into our everyday interactions, oh my goodness, how awesome would life be? Well, we can. There's nothing stopping you, except for this thing right here. See this brain? Wouldn't it be great if they were like all gorgeous like that? We can pretend. The only part of the brain that's really causing us some problems is the amygdala. You see that little tiny peanut part? It's little tiny. I know the screen is far back. The amygdala is what regulates our emotions, right? So if something is triggering or upsetting, the amygdala then sends signals to the prefrontal cortex where our executive decisions are made. And if the amygdala is triggered, guess what messages are going to go to the prefrontal cortex? Fight, flight, freeze. Now, here's the downside of this. If you are under 25, your prefrontal cortex is still developing. There's a reason rental cars, they won't let you get one until you're 25. They know this. They know that you still gotta get a little time to, they call it maturity, but it's really just your brain. It's just the natural way your brain develops. So we may not always make the most rational decisions when we're younger. That doesn't make you bad. It doesn't make you wrong. It just means that you got more growth going on. And sometimes, even when you're an adult and your prefrontal cortex has been fully developed, if your amygdala is saying something is a threat, you're not going to act as thoughtfully or courageously as you could. But when you're calm, when things are relaxed, when it's an environment where you can laugh and you know you're in good company and you feel safe, you do make clearer decisions. You do have that clarity, right? And so that's why even more why it's so important that we can't always be in a constant state of fear. And that's challenging because we are constantly told to be afraid. You turn on the TV, you go online, be afraid. Be afraid of people who don't look like you, who don't think like you, who don't love like you, who don't vote like you. Oh my, how are you not fully always in a state of fight, flight, or freeze? Let me ask you, how many of you have ever been afraid to say something because you didn't want to say the wrong thing? A lot of hands. My hand too. How many of you have been afraid of just saying nothing at all? Because that'll be interpreted as like not being on the right side of things. Yeah. How are we supposed to operate and function if that is the state we are constantly in? You can't. You can't. So we have to be brave enough to say no more, no más. This is not okay. This is not how I'm supposed to be operating. This is not the world I'm supposed to be living in. And so what does that mean? We have to have grace. We have to have forgiveness. And we have to act from those places and spaces when someone misspeaks or when something happens that we're not comfortable with. We have to be brave enough to say something, brave enough to hear the answer, and brave enough and strong enough to forgive and to share then information that may help the conversation develop so that everyone can kind of see where everybody else was coming from. And that's not easy. That takes maturity, that takes heart, that takes effort. And some of us, listen, some of us are just exhausted, right? Because we've been doing this work for a long time, and it seems like this never-ending circle. But guess what? There is a way to do this so that it doesn't have to be exhausting, so that it actually can be a space where we call people in. And the more times you can do that, the more often you can have those inviting conversations, guess what? The better the relationships you develop. So I want to thank you for your honesty and your vulnerability for all of this. I know that it's not easy always talking about this. It's not easy admitting things, raising your hand in front of a whole group of people. Like, that's a lot. That's a lot. So I'm going to leave you with some of the tips in the course that I created. And one of the lessons that I take to all of the people when I talk about Inversity is that, how do we do this? How do we get past all of these obstacles? Well, we care, right? CARE is an acronym for conscious empathy. Not to be confused with sympathy. Sympathy is when you feel bad for someone. Oh, what a shame, too bad. Empathy is, putting yourself in someone else's shoes. Conscious empathy is empathy on steroids, all right? It means that you go deep, sometimes a little uncomfortable, but you ask at least 2 questions. What is it like for them, and how might that feel? What is it like to be somebody who may be the only one in a certain group, right? What is it like to be somebody who speaks English as a second language? What is it like to be somebody who may have a physical handicap? What is it like to be somebody who feels like they identify in a different gender than their assigned body? Like, what is it? There's so many, what does it feel like? How might it feel to not know the right thing to say? How might it feel to be an older person who may not be completely up on technology and is trying to figure, there are just so many ways that we can dive deep into other people's experiences. It doesn't have to be uncomfortable, but it's just certainly a way to consider, okay, you know what? It's not just all about me. That's really all this is. It's not just all about me. Active listening. This one is huge. Huge, huge, huge. How many times have you been in a conversation with someone and you know that all they're doing is waiting for you to stop talking so they can say what they have to say? Right? All the time. And guess what? If you've seen it and you've experienced it, you've probably done it too. We all do it. Again, it's not about being a bad person. It's just about having the awareness. When you are truly active listening, you know what you're doing? You're doing what you're doing for me right now. You're looking at me. I'm looking at you in the eyes. I feel you. You feel me. You are present. I am present. You don't have your phone out. You don't have your computer up. You are paying attention. Do you know what a gift that is? Do you know what a gift you're giving me right now? Do you know that when people feel heard, they feel loved? There's no difference in that feeling. It's the equivalent feeling. And guess what? When people feel loved, they feel valued. You know what valued people do? They add value. That's why it's important that we take the time to listen and to be present. That's why it's healing. That's why it's cathartic. That's why it's not just sitting down and, oh, let me hear what so-and-so has to say. It's powerful stuff, y'all. We're making magic here. This is the last place you're going to go for active listening. Great place to catch up with friends. Great place for blueberry recipes. Last place for active listening. Responsible reactions. This is a big one, right? Oh my goodness. We already acknowledge, like, we're human, right? We react. And sometimes we listen to react and we listen to respond. And there is a difference, but most of the times we react. And it's hard not to react, especially when you got people that say wild stuff. I call it the 5 C's of wackadoodle stuff, right? Sometimes people have couth, or no couth, rather. They're uncouth, no class. In Texas, we say they weren't raised right. Sometimes people have curiosity. Now, I'm not saying don't be curious. Like, I want people to be curious about one another. We have to remain curious, right? Because this is my true belief, honest to goodness. The opposite of love isn't hate. The opposite of love is indifference. And when we stop being curious, we start to become indifferent. Now, you can be curious and you can be courteous. And that's something that we have to remember. Sometimes people are clueless. That is me more than I wish I'd like to admit, right? Now, I know we have multiple generations in this room, and I will give you an example of my cluelessness. Let me ask you guys, and you shout it out, tell me, when you were growing up, what did you call it when you sat down on the floor cross-legged? Older people? That was not what we grew up calling it, was it? No. See, y'all, this younger generation, you had a different set of words. When I was growing up, we called it Indian style. I did not know it had changed until my little daughters were in a karate class, and the teacher calls them to the front and says, okay, everybody, sit down, crisscross applesauce. I go, that's not crisscross applesauce, that's Indian style. Oh, dear God. Oh, I can see why that's not appropriate anymore. Oh, yeah. So think about that. And again, let's bring grace into this conversation. If I hadn't had small kids and I hadn't been exposed to that, I would have never known that the linguistics had changed, that the terminology had changed. And I think about all the people my friends who don't have kids, that unless they went through a training at work, probably didn't know and may have slipped. Are we going to beat them up verbally because they're not up to speed? Are we going to say, hey, just so you know, by the way, this is why, this isn't considered politically correct anymore or appropriate, or it could be insulting to multiple cultures, really. That's how we have to think about how we react to things. And of course, same with some people are careless. They just let things slip. They just forget, right? They grew up saying one thing and they know it's not okay anymore, but they weren't even thinking, and it just spills out. And let's face it, callous. Some people are just not nice people. But this is what I believe, and I will always believe this. Hurt people hurt people. Now, I'm not saying it is any of your responsibility to be anybody's psychologist, therapist, sociologist. You have to protect your energy. But if you have the energy and you have that space in your heart to understand maybe why someone who is so hurt is so mean or angry or upset, maybe you can help them get to the bottom of some things that they may not have even realized they were dealing with. And again, that's completely up to you. Lastly, this was part of, we're going to move on from that. Environmental awareness. This is the E in caring. We have to really be aware of what is happening around us. And again, Doug and I were talking yesterday. As a comedian, when you're on stage, you see everything, right? You see who is looking at their watch. You see who's checking their phone. You see who's getting up to use the restroom. You see who's talking to the server to order a drink. Like, you see everything. And it's an acute awareness that I don't think everybody has. And that's okay. But there's an environmental awareness that we should develop. And it should be an awareness of who else is in our world, who else is in our circles, who's new to our community, who else may have had a very different experience. You know, I get it. Birds of a feather flock together. That's not just an expression because it's cute and it rhymes, right? It's an expression because it's true. We like to be comfortable. There's no harm or crime in that. But we have to remember sometimes that in our own comfort, we can be excluding people because it may be uncomfortable because we may not know like what to say or how to act around them or think that they're so different. We forget that whole 4 10,000ths of a percentage point. So we have to be environmentally aware. We have to think outside of ourselves if we are sincere about cultures of belonging and inclusivity. And when you care, when you have the conscious communication, when you have the conscious empathy, the active listening, the responsible reactions, and environmental awareness, you know what? You get more caring. You get communication, acceptance, respect, and engagement. Who does not want that? Who doesn't want that for themselves? Who doesn't want that for their community, for their school, for their family, for society? We do. We all want that. And one of the things that we have to understand, and it's a motto at Inversity, is that this isn't hard work, right? I don't think anything I've put in front of you today, you're going to go home and be like, oh, Karith just gave me the worst assignment. It's not hard work. It's heart work. It's heart work. And I'm going to give you actually some neuroscience to back that up. So this is the human heart. Again, wouldn't it be great if it was really that gorgeous? It's so powerful. But the human heart is more than just this incredible muscle that keeps us alive. You know what it is? The human heart is actually a little brain. Did you know that? Did you know that? The human heart has over 40,000 neuroreceptors that independently think, feel, learn, reason from the brain. Doesn't it make sense now? When you break up with somebody or they've broken up with you, and even if you know it wasn't going to end well, it wasn't necessarily the healthiest relationship, your heart still hurts. It's why when somebody dies, even though you know they're no longer suffering, they're out of their pain, your heart still hurts. That's why. Your brain knows logically they're in a better place. But your heart aches because it's thinking and feeling. This is how we have to start thinking about the work and our connection to it. It's not just about what our minds think, it's about how our hearts feel about one another and about ourselves. It's powerful, powerful stuff. It's also challenging stuff. It takes work, it takes effort, it takes energy. And all I could think about was, you remember this dress? Who remembers this dress? Who's never seen this dress before? Okay, there are a couple people, that's fine. So this is years old, by the way. This is the same dress, FYI. It's the same exact dress, but it's put up here so you could see how people see it. Now, I'll tell you the backstory behind this dress if you didn't know. The original dress was black and blue, and a woman in England was looking at dresses to buy for her daughter's wedding. She took a picture of the dress on the right and sent it to several friends. Some of them texted back, oh, it's gorgeous. My British accent coming out. Some of them texted back, I can't believe you'd wear white to your own daughter's wedding. And she's like, what are you talking about? And that's how it started. Some people saw it as black and gold, blue. Excuse me. Some people saw it as white and gold. Who saw it as black and blue? Okay. Let's say, who saw it as white and gold? Okay. Little less white and gold. Who saw it as both? Who had the experience of both? Okay. Now, why was it such a big deal when somebody saw it different from you? Shout it out. Why was it such a big deal? It what? Opinions, right? It was their opinion. Was that what you said? Okay. What else? Why was it such a big deal? It was different, right? You said someone over here said something? Appropriate? That it wasn't appropriate? That they were seeing something different from you? Okay. Anybody else want to give a shout out? It made you doubt yourself. Yes. Think about it. You saw it one way, you've encountered somebody who saw it completely opposite you, and you thought, how is this possible? Like, is something wrong with me? Are they messing with me? Am I not right? Are they wrong? Everybody who saw it thought they were right, which meant that if there is a right, then there has to be a wrong. Yes, that's the world we live in, this binary world of good, bad, left, right, up, down, right, wrong. But here's the thing, we found out scientifically there's a reason why people saw it differently. It has to do with how their eyes operate, how they take in light. Think about how many other things that are happening in the world that we're looking at, all looking at it together at the same time, but we're seeing it differently because we have different lenses on. And yet, this creates this division, sometimes a war, sometimes a literal war, because we see it differently. We're looking at the same thing. We have to decide, are we going to let what we see have the blinders on and not see how somebody else sees it? Or are we going to be open to at least hearing their thoughts and ideas on it so that we can get another perspective? Are we going to stick to our guns, or are we going to be open? Are we going to try to persuade someone else, or are we going to let them be? Are we going to have dialogue so that we can at least, again, just have an understanding? Now, I think there's very little in the world that is completely right or wrong, black and white. Not very little. There is a lot. I mean, there's a lot that is. There's very little that isn't sometimes. This, however, is one that is, there is a right and a wrong. I'm sorry. There is a right and a wrong. And under people, bless your heart. As we say in Texas, you're special. So there's a tie-in. There's a tie-in to all that I do. There's a tie-in to my book. There's a tie-in to the messaging. There's a tie-in to Dr. King. And I wrote You Can Be Perfect, You Can Be Happy between 3 and 5 in the morning on my phone over the course of several months. It was a download. It was literally God waking me up and saying, get this out of you. And I knew that when I did it, it was a giant note to self. But I also knew that it was a giant note to other people. I wish somebody had written this book and given it to me when I was 20 years old. It would have changed my life. What I do know is that you guys are the key. All of you. And all of this work, it does start with you. And I'm not saying that to, butter you up or blow V8. I'm saying it because it's true. I know it's true. I see it. I witness it every day, every time I speak, especially to young people. Y'all have so much potential to do so much good in the world. You have so much potential to not get caught up in the drama that can be created around you. And that sometimes we can create, let's be real. But one of the chapters in the book is be kind. And I think that we need to remember because we think, well, I've been taught to be kind since I was a little kid. I say please and thank you, and I have manners. I hold the door open for someone. Yeah, that's certainly a way to be kind. And it is lovely to be kind to other people, and you should, absolutely, be as kind as you can, because you never know the ripple effect. You never know what giving someone a compliment is going to do. You never know what returning someone's phone is going to do. I found a phone on a bus in New York City. The girl got off, and I saw her phone, and I thought about turning it into the MTA, or do I keep it and try to get it back to her? And I thought, if I turn it in the MTA, she's never going to get it back. Like, it's just gone. So this was before, like, really caller ID and stuff, and I couldn't find her number on it. Like, this was the early 2000s. It was not a smartphone by any stretch of the imagination. So I'm scrolling alphabetically, and I get to Daddy, because I don't even know her name. I can't even call her friends and be like, hey, I have your so-and-so's phone. So I get to the D's, I get to Daddy, and I go, sir, just before you panic, I want you to know everything's okay, your daughter's fine. I found her phone on a bus in New York City. He goes, which daughter? I'm like, oh, you're a friendly one. I go, the one who lives in Manhattan? He goes, well, I got 4 daughters. 2 of them live in Manhattan. I'm like, well, good for them. I go, I don't know who she is. I go, she's got shoulder-length brown hair. We're on the east side. He goes, oh, that's, what did he say her name was? Emily. I go, oh, great. Can you call Emily? Because people still had home phones, by the way. This is how old this was. Can you call Emily, let her know I've got her phone, and I'll return it to her? He goes, why don't you call her? I go, because I have her phone. So he must have done it. And she called me the next day. I was working at Estee Lauder. And she meets me at lunch, and I go down to the lobby, and she was so sweet. She gave me a gift card to, like, Bloomingdale's or Macy's or something. And I give her phone back, and we just start talking. And, what did you do? What do you do? I said, well, I do this, but I do stand-up at night. She's like, oh, I love stand-up comedy. I'd love to come see you. That was it. I thought that was my good deed for the day. That was my karma. And we said goodbye. 3 months later, I run into a friend of mine who happened to own a comedy club on the Lower East Side. She's like, Karith, you're not going to believe this. I was just sitting on a plane next to the girl whose phone you found. I go, you've got to be kidding me. She goes, no. I said, what? That's amazing. And I know what happened. They're sitting next to each other. What do you do? What do you do? Oh, I own a comedy club. Oh, I met a comedian a couple months ago. She gave me my phone back. This is where it gets really cool and a little goosebumpy. She goes, Karith, she and her father had been estranged for years. They hadn't talked to one another for years. But when he had to call her to tell her that you had his phone, they reconnected. She was on that plane because she was going to see her dad. That's what kindness does. You have no idea. It was nothing for me to do that. It wasn't a big deal. But it literally changed 2 people, maybe an entire family's life. That's the power we have. Okay? But here's the thing. I don't want you to think you just be kind to other people. You got to be kind to yourself. You got to wake up in the morning, look in the mirror, and not have the first thing in your thoughts be something nasty and mean and awful. Because guess what? Most of the time it is. Most of the time we get up, we look in the mirror, oh, look at that pimple, look at that wrinkle, look at that cellulite, look at that. What? We say stuff to ourselves that if someone else said them to us, we would be like, who raised you? We'd be appalled. And yet we do it. So we've got to stop that. We've got to stop. We've got to be kind to ourselves. And there are so many ways to be kind, y'all. There's so many ways. You can, from getting a massage, treating yourself well, putting good stuff in your body, laughing, exercising, and of course, chocolate. Oops. Chocolate is a very good way to be kind to yourself. And this is the last one I'm going to leave you on. You have to remember perfection is a lie. We are perfect as we are, but thinking that we're not, that's the lie. Thinking that we have to do anything else to achieve perfection, that's the lie. And it's hard. Because again, there's a barrage of images and messages and social media and movies and TVs telling us like, oh, well, this is wrong with you. You just need this. You gotta, and then after you graduate from school, you gotta get this job. You gotta be with this person. You gotta live in this neighborhood. You gotta have this many kids. You gotta drive this car. Then things will be perfect. No, no, no. That's a lie. Happiness is real. Now, there's some things about happiness I should tell you about. This is individual as we are. It's also, the caveat, it's not constant. That's okay too. It's okay to have bad days. It's great to have good days. It's okay to have bad days. It's like a heartbeat, right? The highs and the lows. You ever see one of those EKGs, right? High, when it's good, enjoy it for what it is. Live in that moment. When it's low, remember, that's also temporary. It's not the end of the world. It's not forever. You go high, you go low. That's life. That is life. The only time you are in trouble, just like when it's a heart monitor, is when you got a straight line. Okay? So, I want you to understand that you are perfect just as you are, that you are powerful, that you have everything within you to achieve what you want to do. That doesn't mean you do it all by yourself, because that's why you have these people around you. It's why you have your family around you. It's why you have your friends around you. There's no self-made anything. One of the worst magazine covers I ever saw was it Kylie Jenner? Said youngest self-made billionaire. Did we really believe she did that all by herself? No. But that was the messaging. So then we internalize that and we think, oh, I got to do this all by myself. You don't. You have people. You have a connection to source. You're not by yourself at all, and you don't have to do it by yourself. And all of this, bringing Dr. King back into the loop, is I believe the messaging that he was trying to give us from so many decades ago about loving one another as we love ourselves, which means we have to love ourselves. So with that, I want to say thank you so much for your time, for your presence, for your energy. I will be back there after I do an interview and some other stuff. I have books if you would like to buy one and get it autographed. But I cannot thank you enough, and I hope that I was deserving of this platform today. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Turn this on. Excuse me, before you leave, just want to do final announcements here. My name is Joaquin Villanueva. I'm co-director of Peace, Justice, and Conflict Studies program. I'm also part of the organizing committee of the MLK lecture. I just want to thank, again, one more time, Karith Foster for her amazing lecture today. Yesterday, I was taking my 12-year-old to a soccer practice, and I turned the car on. It was cold, of course, and so we're waiting, and on the radio, there was a speech. They were airing a speech of Martin Luther King, which actually captivated us. It was a surprise, and we just listened for 5 minutes. And then after that, I talked with my 12-year-old about the work of Martin Luther King and the work that needs to be done. And then it reminded me of how important those words are and how important it is to continue the legacy of Dr. King. And so I want to thank Dr. Karith Foster for really continuing that legacy. And I think we young people are listening. And so I think that's important. I see a lot of young people here today, and hopefully that message resonates with you. Finally, I want to mention that we are celebrating 50 years of peace education at Gustavus. The Peace, Justice, and Conflict Studies program is one of the oldest in the nation. And so we have this semester, throughout the year, many events happening. But one of them is right now, if after you leave the chapel, if you go to a campus center, we have a wall display there with an amazing history of 50 years of peace education at Gustavus, including sort of a history of the MLK lecture since the 1980s. It's a beautiful display. I ask you to go there, reflect on today's lecture, on those 50 years of peace education, and be on the lookout, particularly on May 1st, we'll have a big celebration of 50 years of the PJCS program. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day. Thanks for coming.